Welcome from the IIBA Tampa Bay, Florida chapter. This is our study group for October 26th of 2023. This is our 97th class. Today we're going to be talking about techniques of scope modeling and the rules and permissions matrix. And if we get done fast enough, we might add a third one just as a bonus. Your input on these is quite appreciated. Our mission here at the IIBA Tampa Bay, Florida chapter is to bridge the gap between industry leaders and business analysts by building partnerships with professionals, educators, and employers so that we may empower, instruct, and engage the BA community. Our BA community is worldwide. We're not limited to just Tampa Bay or just Florida. We have people from all over the world that watch or participate in these meetings, and we appreciate every single one of you. If these meetings are of value to you, please reach out and let us know. We've got people that are dedicated and show up here week after week, and they kind of need to hear that what they're doing is important to you. We don't charge money for this. This is just for our community to grow and get better, and we appreciate your input. We also appreciate your participation. We have our study group every Thursday from 7 to 8 p.m. Eastern. With the exception, we are now announcing that we're going to take a break at the end of this year. The week of Thanksgiving through the end of December, we're going to take off because we need a break too. And then we'll start again in January. So letting you know now, the week of Thanksgiving through the end of the year, we will not be meeting. Then we will start again on the same time, same bat channel, all that stuff on Thursdays from 7 to 8 p.m. We have our past meeting recordings here at this link. Cliff will drop it into the chat. rpchurchill.com is also a place that you can get an index of all of our meetings, all of the recordings, all of the interviews. Everything that we've done is on that. Plus, his website has a lot of other good stuff on it. I encourage you to explore it. We also have an IIBA site, Meetup, Zoom, Facebook, LinkedIn. We've got a lot of ways for you to reach us. Reach out if you have any questions or if you want any assistance. Watermark Learning has been our constant supporter through this study group. They have given us a discount code of TAMPA21, which will give you 20% off of any of their products. They have not only business analysis products, but others as well. We are a volunteer-led organization. Cliff, our president, you can see him there in the Millennium Falcon. It looks like a dogfight going on behind him. He's our president. He is also our marketing genius. We do appreciate him. Yulia is our vice president of finance, and Caitlin and Priscilla are board members at large. My name is Thea Soehren. I'm the vice president of career and professional development, and it is my job to be sure that you get taught what you need to get taught. If you have questions, reach out to me through LinkedIn. That's the best way to reach me. If you're interested in participating in our board and helping raise our community, reach out to me or reach out to Cliff, and we will find something that fits in with your schedule that you can do that benefits you and benefits our community. We are always appreciative of the CBAPs that participate in our study groups. We have to have a CBAP participate in our study group for you to get to claim this as education credit. Bob Churchill has been our constant CBAP, and with just very few exceptions, he's always here. And we've had 97 meetings, guys. Do y'all realize what kind of level of commitment that takes? Bob is our dude. Yulia has also signed on to come on periodically for us whenever Bob is not available. Yulia, as you know, was a member of our study group for a long time, and then she passed her certification. We are very appreciative of that. We have a whole list of people that have passed their certification. In fact, I got one the other day, and I haven't added it to the list. But
I was just going to ask you about that. I think Roshni,
that's right. Roshni passed her CBAP certification. And so I will add her to the list. But if y'all have done this, if you have passed any of your certifications and we were able to contribute to that, if we get any little bit of credit, let us know so we can put it on this list. This is kind of our brag sheet. This is like, look, all this work we're doing is helping people. And your certification isn't the only way you can become better business analysts or better people, but it's a kind of a trait, a road sign that it's working. So today, as I said, we're going to talk about scope modeling and rules and permissions matrix. I'm going to start with scope modeling. Scope modeling, according to the BABOK. And as you know, We talk according to the BABOK because you have to be able to know what the BABOK says to pass the test. We will also talk about outside of the BABOK in real life, if there's anything different, but let's just talk about this. Scope modeling truly is a diagram that shows you what's in scope and what's out of scope. So if you know what a context diagram is, I've got it here on another sheet. This is just a context diagram. This may be a project. This shows you who you're working with, what processes you're working with. This is all within scope. I have seen very, very clear scope diagrams that have just a few lines. You don't have to be super complicated, but a scope diagram makes it very clear what it is in scope and what is not in scope. I have seen scope diagram models that show what is not in scope by putting it in a different color in a box off to the side. Just in case anybody had any confusion, it makes it very clear out of scope. So for instance, if you had a project that you were bringing on a new web page and you were not impacting the order management system, you would put order management system, isolated box off to the side, and the things about the web page in your scope diagram. So let's talk about what the IIBA says about a scope diagram. Scope models define the nature of one or more limits or boundaries and place elements inside or outside of those boundaries. Very often I've seen either the scope of the project inside of a box and everything else outside, or vice versa. Everything else here is here, and then out of scope is in a box off to the side like it's in timeout, which is kind of a good way to talk about it. It's in timeout. Scope models are commonly used to describe the boundaries of control, change, a solution, or a need. They may also be used to delimit any simple boundary as distinct from horizons, emergent properties, or reclusive systems. So you talk about in scope, out of scope, and then there's some things that may be both. You may have some elements of an item that we're going to change this piece of it, but we're not going to change this other piece of it. Does that make sense? It's kind of ambiguous, but it depends on what your project is. Okay. Project, we're going to repackage this this kind of drink. And so we're going to redesign it, but we are not going to change the actual shape of the can. That's not in what we're doing. We are going to change the color. We're going to change the verbiage. We're going to change the symbols. So part of it would be in scope, part of it would be out of scope, but it's still the appearance of the can that we're talking about. Okay. Scope models provide the basis of understanding the boundaries of scope of control, which is what is being analyzed, roles and responsibilities, what is internal and external to the organization, or scope of need, what the stakeholders need, value to be delivered, functional areas and organizational units to be explored, the scope of the solution, which requirements are going to be met, what the value is to be delivered or impact of change, and the scope of change, actions to be taken, stakeholders affected or involved, and events to cause or prevent. We want to, for instance, we want to cause an invitation to be automatically sent by email, but we don't want that invitation to be sent repeatedly just in case somebody signs up more than once. So we want it to cause something, we want it to prevent something else. Scope models are typically represented in a combination of diagrams, matrices, and textual explanations. What I showed you a while ago is a context diagram. Very simple, very clean. A matrix would be a spreadsheet. I would encourage you to make it as simple and concise as possible, but having all the important details. And if there's details that are important to one group that the other group has no care about, you might need to make, one for the group that wants to have everything, and then a second one for the group that they don't need all the details. If the scope is implemented in phases or iterations, the scope model should also be described per each phase or iteration. So iteration 1, you're going to do these things. Iteration 2, it's going to expand. Iteration 3, it's going to expand further. I encourage you, if you're going to do that, make your first one, copy it onto a different tab, maybe in Visio or PowerPoint, whichever you need, and then make your changes, and then copy it again for iteration 3. That way you don't have things jumping all over the board and people can go, oh, this one still stays in the same place. Visually, it doesn't distract people and it keeps the confusion factor down. Okay, elements of a scope diagram. Let's move down. The objective is typically used to clarify the span of control, relevance of elements, and where effort will be applied. That way everybody's rowing the boat in the same direction. You all have the same goal to get to. And depending on the action of stakeholders' needs, the model supports. The business analyst determines the type of model to be used and selects boundaries and events. This is one of those things where, as a business analyst, we often are talking to people that maybe this is the first time to be introduced to the project. So it's really important that you get somebody else to kind of look over what you have, somebody that doesn't know anything about your project, to look over what you have independently to be sure it's clear. Because as business analysts, we get so deep in the weeds that we assume everybody understands something, even without us processing it that way. So that we might put something on there and just, we might use an acronym. We might not say that this is an indirect link. We might, something that would confuse people eventually. It's always good to have somebody to review it before you bring it out into public. Scope of change in context. Typically, business analysts are concerned with elements that will be altered as part of the change, as well as external elements that are relevant to the change. For elements inside the scope of change, the business analyst is involved in establishing the ways those elements are modified. For elements outside the scope of the change but relevant, the business analyst is involved in establishing the interactions between the change, the current and proposed solutions, and the context. This would be something, for instance, let's say you work for an insurance company and you need to get payments to an external banking center. So you're going to be talking about an API that has to send stuff out, what you have to log, what to do in case of error, things like that. That's all external, but it's triggered by what you're working on. The business analyst often determines the business processes to be defined or modified, the business functions to be added, changed, optimized, or reassigned, new capabilities to be built or existing capabilities to be changed, external and internal events to be responded to. Folks, this is a whole long list and it's very complex. I would encourage that you look at this from the perspective that these are suggestions of things you need to consider. You're not going to have all of these on every context diagram. Every scope diagram, but consider if you need it. And if you have any doubt, ask somebody else. Do we have any of this? Is this something that we need to consider for now or in the future? Just make it very thorough. Level of detail, you get to determine your level of detail. With context diagrams, you have level 0, level 1, level 2, and it gets more refined as you get deeper. You determine the level of detail as you begin a project, and it may get more detailed as you get deeper into that project. For instance, iteration 2, iteration 3. Let's see. Similarly, stakeholders included in the scope can be defined by enumerating specific titles or by referring to their common organizational role. This is one of those things where you don't want to use someone's name as the only way to identify them because people change roles. You may say the project manager - Jenny. And then that way everyone knows it's the project manager. And if Jenny changes, they still know it's the project manager. Let's see, relationships. As context diagrams, you understand the relationships to be identified there. Parent, child, or composition subset, function, responsibility, supplier, consumer, cause, effect, or emergent. And then assumptions. The validity of the model heavily relies on the assumptions such as definition of need, causality of outcomes, impact of changes, applicability, and feasibility of solution. A resulting scope model should include explicit statements of critical assumptions and their implications. In other words, if you have to assume something is some way, write it down. That way people can at least be aware that you're making the assumption and that you might need to have a conversation about it. You may be in error, but there are many assumptions that as a business analyst going into a new industry or into a new organization, you're able to see that people make assumptions that they're not even aware of assumptions, or they don't state something because it's like everybody knows that. You need to document it. Scope modeling results. Results of scope modeling can be represented as, I already said all this. And then usage considerations. The scope model facilitates agreements as a basis for. So this is like the beginning of the team agreement of what this project is. Defining contractual obligations, estimating the project effort, justifying in-scope and out-of-scope decisions in requirements analysis, and assessing the completeness and impacts of solutions. Your limitations are it can lack sufficient detail or granularity, particularly for boundary elements, that is needed to ensure clear scope identification. So having the diagram allows you to begin that conversation. Once the scope is defined, changing it may be difficult due to political reasons and contractual obligations. So it's really important that you kind of talk to a couple of people to be sure that it is defined properly before you roll it out to everyone. Meanwhile, many factors can affect the scope validity before the targets are achieved. Such factors as wrong initial assumptions, situation change, evolution of stakeholder needs, technology innovations may cause a need for revising the scope partially or entirely. So as you create scope diagrams, it's really good that you put version whatever and as of date. That way, you know, if it has to be changed, you get those updated. And then traditional scope models cannot address common complex boundaries such as a horizon, a boundary that's completely dependent upon the position of the stakeholder. You can't control where they go. They're like wild animals. So you have to be able to revise your scope diagram based upon their situation. Has anyone ever used a scope diagram or a context diagram to identify what is in scope and out of scope in a project? Bob, you have?
Oh, yeah.
How does it help?
Well, it defines what's in and what's out. So I usually do most of my work in terms of flow diagrams, right? I'm a process engineer and analyst from way back. And one of the first ways I thought about this was when I used to write thermal hydraulic simulations for nuclear power plant simulators.
Right.
And the nuclear power plant is a fantastically complex thing, and they're made up of 50 or more separate piping and tank and electrical systems and rooms and airflows and everything else. And you need to define where everyone starts and stops. And there are many, many different kinds of drawings that define all these things. So there were two levels of scope that we had to deal with in the context of building a simulator. One is how do you wall off the systems from each other, right? And there may be a half a dozen systems or maybe more that connect with the main containment vessel where the nuclear reactions happen and where the heat is generated. So you might have reactor water cleanup. You've got some safety systems, you've got the main recirc, you've got the control rod drive system, you've got a boron injection system, you've got a pressurizer kind of thing, you've got drains and special filters, you have a lot of things and they're all you want to think about all those separately. So drawing boundaries between all the systems and how they talk to each other and interface with each other. That's one form of it. Also, within every system, there's a lot of potential equipment that you don't really need for the actual simulation. So the point of a simulation is to train users to operate the controls in the control panels based on what buttons, switch dials, knobs, readouts, and so on are actually available. And there are a lot of the main flows and equipment in each system interact with the control panel, but there might be a whole lot of ancillary equipment that's used for clean out and sampling and maintenance and things like that.
So Bob, let me ask you a question. So a scope diagram would allow people to know what things you were considering and what things that were not needed to be considered in that process. Is that
correct? There were two things. Let me finish telling the story. I know it's complicated. I'm
Yes.
almost done though.
Okay.
So the second part, like I was saying, is there's a lot of stuff you don't use during normal operation of the plant. So the first part of the scope definition is understanding where the boundaries of each system were. So the people in the plant thought about these things conceptually as there were different systems, and we as modeling engineers, the simulation software guys, we thought about the systems in the same way, and it defined what we did and did not include in each model. The other half of it, like I said, is within each model, we had to understand what to include and what to ignore within each system. So the boundaries were defined on two different levels. The way we received the system definitions was they gave us the PNIs, which is piping in instrumentation diagrams, and that included the instruments, the pipes, the tanks, the vessels, the rooms, the spaces, and the pumps and other equipment and valves that we needed to deal with. They were all highlighted in like a blue highlighter. And all the ancillary equipment, clean out valves and access pipes and hatches and whatever, we ignored that stuff.
Okay.
There are a lot of ways to think about that. Scope is whatever you're going to deal with and whatever you're not going to deal with.
That's
in
right.
whatever context.
That's right. Very good. Thank you, Bob. Has anyone else used the scope diagram to show people what's in scope and out of scope?
The scope diagram has, I've used a scope diagram usually as a feasibility study, but the core of the scope diagram, especially from a supplier consumer, and then what Bob said was perfect. Like, so from trying to innovate on a scope modeling, what should we do? Should we go back to the BABOK and try to figure out a lineage of as business analysts? Should we find a business analyst? Should we find a lineage of what the next scope will be? Like, for example, whether it's in scope, out of scope, whether it's in scope, out of scope, basically to alleviate the pain points. No pain. So how to do how do you, like, how to do that?
Okay, so whenever you begin your first iteration, you need to know what your goal is. And so the scope of items that will allow you to reach your goal need to be identified in iteration 1. And then for your second iteration, you probably have a different goal. It's probably building on top of iteration 1. And so you're going to probably add some things to scope, and you may possibly remove some things from scope at that point. So using color coding on that is a great way to do it. Does that answer your question?
That was amazing. So then, do you do like oranges in scope, blue is out of scope, and then play collaborative games around that, like something like that?
You can. I actually, because of the American with Disabilities Act and the rules about color blindness, I typically will make things that are out of scope. I'll put them on the screen, but I'll make them a light gray. And then everything else has brighter colors. And I just use 2 colors to make them. It's like we are working on these. And sometimes I'll say group 1 is working on everything orange and group 2 is working on everything blue. And then the things that are out of scope are gray. That way they can see that we considered them, but they're not in scope.
Oh, we see that we considered them, but they're not in scopes. But out of scope as well, based on what's on screen. That makes sense. Thank you so much. So wonderful of you. Thank you.
You're welcome.
If you're familiar with engineering, like if you're going to do a thermodynamics or fluid mechanics problem, they have a concept called the control volume or control surface. And for example, you might draw a free body diagram to show all the forces acting in every direction on some object. Or you will show an entire system and then draw a boundary of what part of that system you're going to consider the operation and analysis of. So if you think of a large flow diagram, if you draw a box or some kind of boundary across connections that shows what processes you're going to address and what you're not, that is the definition of a scope. I always love to communicate in pictures, and that kind of diagram is super helpful.
In thermodynamics, when you complex diagramming, would you still simplify it, like dynamics, thermodynamics with the flow control? So basically, a mainframe to something like a job control that has like a specific system that you mentioned that's very complex. Would you still simplify the diagram by adding more connectors, or would just keep the diagram like a still diagram?
Well, thermodynamics and IT systems are 2 different things, but whatever you're going to show, you might include everything that's in a certain area and then draw a boundary around only the part you're going to consider.
Oh, fantastic. So
that's what it's all about. The scope is defines the work you're going to do. And things that are out of scope, you may talk to them. Somebody else may do that work, or the interfaces with the external things may be defined, and you have to figure out how to receive things from those systems that you need in the form those systems already provide, and or send things to those systems in ways they can understand that are defined. And if you're working on something, you can negotiate how those communications happen.
So let's talk about scope diagrams based on your audience. What I'm showing right here could be a scope diagram that I would show to the executives and management of this is what the project is going to include. However, if I'm actually talking to the lead architect, the developers, it would probably have all of the jumps in the middle, which API we're talking about, the application that it's actually using. If purchasing is a specific program, we're going to call it that program, you know, the details that they need to know to be able to say, oh, now we understand what we're working on.
Mhm.
So you're not going to necessarily have the same scope diagram for different people in the organization. It's going to have the same basic information, but it's going to be applicable to what they need to understand to have a good conversation, to be sure you didn't miss anything and that you have everything correct.
Wow, okay. But in the ERP, Oracle ERP, there's in SAP ERP also, there's the order fulfillment management system it's like becomes very complex, order to order, record to record.
It can
Um,
be.
and so yeah, so do you try to so do you just draw 3 boxes and say, hey, you know, this is the most I could do, or do you, like, do
Well,
you incorporate?
let's look at this diagram. You might draw a box just around shipping that cuts across those two arrows that work connect to the order fulfillment system, right? And
Right.
you might make changes to the shipping box only. And then you may find out that has side effects that affect some of the other communications. So that would extend the scope to only those items. But if you can show it on a diagram to limit the work you're going to do, it helps you trace things down.
Mhm.
Right.
That was
So,
awesome.
so
Thank you.
basically you create your scope diagram to make it very clear to the audience you're speaking to, specifically what is in scope and specifically what is out of scope. The amount of detail that you choose is going to be based upon your audience. Some people need more detail. Some people do not want that much detail.
Not at all. We were discussing scope in my project. They were throwing bananas. I mean, it wasn't like it wasn't like it wasn't like, you know, like a formal conversation. It was really, everybody was like, oh no, like this is not going to be, this is definitely not in scope, not in scope. And the stakeholders, they're highly, extremely powerful people. So we're just like, okay, so it's not in scope, you know. So the scope diagram wasn't, a scope model wasn't accurate. So we were saying, okay, let's just throw something there, let's just, and then hopefully, you know, throw something on the wall, and hopefully, you know, it sticks. Otherwise, and then we'll go from there. And so but the model wasn't exact. The model didn't have like a fluid system of what will be in scope and what is not in scope, and
Well,
there was
but
no gap analysis.
you having the diagram allowed y'all to have the understanding that this isn't right, so what needs to be corrected. And so you were able to get to something that's more refined and appropriate and correct than you would have if you just tried to do it verbally.
Yes, exactly. And some of the thing was, it was merger. It was like a First Horizon, a TD Bank. It was like a huge bank merger, and it fell apart. So our models were like, you're drawing diagrams that like, it doesn't even matter, like, you know, like, and
Yeah.
the whole thing falls apart. So you just like, so the system, what you're drawing, the diagram doesn't function, it doesn't run. If it doesn't run, like, if the system doesn't run, then it's like, so it's like a broken program almost. So
Yeah.
then the developers looking at the diagram and say, okay, so what do you want me to code? So they'll say, okay, this is in scope, this is not in scope, but which is the clear part, so which absolutely makes sense. Thank you so
Right.
much. Wonderful.
Right.
Thank you.
I would suggest that as you go through that exercise task, that you figure out a way to like highlight stuff that's been approved. Otherwise, you're going to leave that meeting, go, okay, we talked about this, but which part was still wrong? So you need to, you know, color code the things that are wrong, color code the things that are right. Do something so that you can, whenever you leave the meeting, you know what is been agreed upon. and better yet, who approved each piece. You know, you said you were working with powerful people. If you say Phil Jones, who's the president of that company, said this is right, you want to know after you leave the meeting, Phil Jones said this is right.
But it's 12 fills. 12 it's 12 12 fills at 12, and the thing is, you know, you think like, and then there's all these different people, right? Like what, and then somebody's like, yeah, no, it's a great idea, and then the person's like, oh man, this guy hates me, like why are we even in this meeting? You know,
That's why it's even more important to specify who agreed to what.
yeah, and then two people are doing the whole work, all the work, and then everybody's just like sitting, you know, maybe I answer the phone, and then they're like, and then they look at the scope. Okay, this is what we agreed to, as there's a core mapping document, and in the scope, this is what will come out of.
Right.
But and the rest of us are like, oh wow, okay, cool. So nothing for the business analysts to do. We just you know, hang out and, you know, watch them work, and then, you know, maybe clap a little bit once in a while, and that was it. We didn't know what, like, we didn't know what, like, what was going on. Like what are we watching? This is like a play, like, on the screen, like this whole scene would just, like, it would just like, it was play out, and we were just like, so okay, so we're gonna, like, what's gonna happen in the next scene? There's no, it's like a mystery, it's a comedy, like we didn't know what was going on.
It's going to turn into a tragedy. Whenever you have those, are you doing it over Teams?
Yes, ma'am. It was
Okay. Are
completely
you
over.
recording those meetings?
Yeah, and it was
Okay, that's
recording.
good. That's really good. Record with transcript. That way you have the ability to go back and say, let's listen to what Joe did say.
Yeah, but it's 2 hours. Who's gonna do that? It's 2
Well,
hours.
you
A 5
gotta
minute
make it,
into the conversation.
you gotta negotiate it so everyone understands it, and somebody has to make it stick.
And at the end
Make
of your meeting,
people be responsible for things they committed to. A lot of customers and other managers and participants will try to be like Jello. You're trying to nail to a wall. They will avoid responsibility and be slippery and evasive.
yeah.
And you know, you gotta nail things down and make them stick. Otherwise, you'll never get anything done.
And at the end, they'll melt and stain something. At the end of your meeting, it's really important that somebody, whoever's the facilitator, says, this is what we agreed to, and goes down the list of what has been agreed to. If you have a scribe during those meetings, as you make agreements, identify where in the meeting, what timestamp that agreement was made, and who made that agreement. That way you can, I mean, the decision, not the agreement. The decision was made by Joe at 2:03. That way you can go back in the meeting recording and say at 2:03, this is what happened. And you don't have to go search for it.
Okay, too. I definitely record steps of that meeting. We think it's just gonna occur once and not gonna occur again. And so, and like Bob said, like, really important. There's no like, you know, nailing it down. It's just like, hey, we'll see you next Thursday. And
No,
we'll
you
see
can't do it that way.
next Thursday. If you can make it, cool. If you can't make it, that's also cool. Like, you know,
Well,
doesn't matter, because there's only 2 of us doing all the work anyway. and
yeah.
like, okay, I mean, go guys, you go.
Yeah.
Let us know if you want us to jump in. And so we don't know what the scope modeling is. We don't, like, how do you bring everybody to say, okay, like, listen to the BABOK, listen to the structured analysis approach. It's just, no, let's just throw mud. Like, let's just throw mud, and if it doesn't go, it's just like, and there's a few shy people, and like, including me, right? So I'm like a little shy as well. So like, oh, the business analyst is not saying anything. He's so shy. He, like, you know, he doesn't even no elicitation, no nothing. He's just so shy. And it's like how, like, you know, he's afraid to talk to anybody. What are we gonna do? How are you gonna communicate? So there's like, I had to break that I mean, like, shyness habit, and try to approach them, try to sign smiley faces on Teams, and that helped a lot. So that helped, like, break the ice, and show them, like, smiley faces, upside down faces,
Yeah.
like, so to sort of break the ice, show them that that I love them and stuff. So
Okay. Well,
Right. Anyone else?
hey, Haas, why don't you and I have a conversation offline later this week, and we can see if I can help you, okay?
totally appreciate that. Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. So sweet of
Reach
you.
out to
Thank
me
you.
on LinkedIn, okay?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you.
Okay, let's switch over to the next topic, or we will run out of time. Our next topic is rules and permissions matrix. And Bob, you are working on that one. I will turn the screen over to you.
All right. There we go. Okay. Let's talk about this. So let me. All right. So roles and permissions. Here's basically what goes on. So you have different roles which are assigned to users. They might be in families, and a role is kind of an abstract series of duties and activities that different kinds of people will have, and they can be based on different kinds of jobs and different levels of responsibility, right? So managers and administrators may be able or allowed to do a lot of things, and technical personnel and specialists in various areas may be able to do things or create and modify things within their specialty, and support and line workers may be able to do a lesser amount of things, and there may be some basic activities that everybody can do by default, right? And so roles and permissions matrix is how you define things. And roles are not individuals, although maybe a role will only be assigned to one user. One user. That said, users are assigned roles. So this does not have to apply to IT systems where the activities and permissions are rigorously enforced. They very often are, but they don't always have to be. For example, there were a couple of different occasions when I analyzed operations in a dental office. So I got to know way more about how dentists work than I ever really wanted to know. But, that's the name of the game. So there were three, legally, there were three rules that are defined for work in dentist office. So an actual dentist, somebody who has a doctorate and has been to a full-on dental school and whatever, they can do everything, right? Do your teeth and different kinds of oral surgery and whatnot. And hygienists can do some lesser things. They can do cleanings, they can assist on certain activities. They might be able to fill cavities and whatever. They can take like 3-dimensional impressions using scanners and use certain kinds of equipment, and assistants can do less things. They might be able to do cleanings and do checkups and basic things, and prepare equipment. Now, in the offices I worked in, there were 2 other roles, and one was they were kind of these helper people who laid out the equipment and cleaned all the dental tools in a dishwasher and managed supplies and so on. So they were not allowed to do any actual dental work in patients' mouths, but they had defined duties. They were in the office. And then all the people that worked in the desk in the office, they were administrators. They did all the back office, scheduling, billing, communication, that kind of thing. So those are all rules, and they're not strictly enforced. Somebody in theory can get up from their desk in the office and physically go drill in somebody's mouth, but that would be illegal, immoral, fattening, and stupid, right? And so those rules are define what everybody does. If you have an IT system, then if you log in as a certain kind of user, there are things you can do, there are things you cannot do, and there are screens you will be able to see and screens you won't be able to see, and actions you can take on the screens you can see, and potentially actions you cannot take. So that's the way those things go. So I put up a notional diagram here where I define 4 families of rules, and there can be subtle variations between the user types in each rule. But if you notice, they all have slightly different permissions, and there are some actions that all users can do by default. The other thing is activities can be defined in groups. So if you think about the way file systems and most operating systems work, there are some things you're allowed to do and some things you're not. Some files you can only see and only delete or modify if you have admin privileges, and some you can modify if you're anybody. So there are a lot of different instantiations of this. So also, we can think that there are many different kinds of examples of items that can be created, modified, deleted, and so on. That can pertain to files, it can pertain to users, tasks that need to be done and assigned to various people. So this is only a general series of examples. You can make as many specific things in a system as you can dream up, as long as they're all defined and understood by all the users, implementers, maintainers, administrators, and so on. If they're all documented, if they're all negotiated, you can do whatever you want. But it root up, it's very simple. So the BABOK, the technique, and who cares even what the BABOK says, it defines 3 elements. So rules go across here, that's 1 dimension. Activities go across here, that's the other dimension. That forms a 2-dimensional matrix. And the actual authorities or permissions is whether each group is or each role is allowed to perform that particular activity. That's all it is. So that's really all there is to say about that. It's a mindlessly simple idea, as many of the techniques are. Do you have any questions about that?
The roles and permissions, is it role-based control, access control? In a role, like for example, like when you do you gather specific requirements about a role and then translate that into core processes based on different type of roles?
It might be. And generally, I think you define all the actions that you need to take in a system, and then you define the kinds of people that are responsible for each action and what they should have access to and should not have access to. So you don't want everybody to be the administrator who can change the architecture of a system. For example, if you're creating tasks, you don't necessarily want to have anybody be able to create or approve tasks or users or so on. But you want everybody to be able to receive tasks and work on them and submit them as complete or for review and so on. And you want everybody to be able to, get to the email system and the time card system and the benefit system and so on. So, I
Oh, that's
think you
amazing.
would define the activities first and then the roles afterwards.
Oh, got it. So the decomposition is broken down, roles first, then the permissions. That makes sense, sir. Thank you.
No, go backwards. Go backwards.
Activities first,
It's
then the rules,
mhm.
then the permissions.
Roles, permission, then the roles.
Activities first.
Activity.
Abstractly figure out what the system needs to do. Then the roles of all the participants and users in the system, both to operate the system and to maintain and administer the system. And then you figure out what each role can actually do.
So let me give you an
Activity.
example, Tejas. Customer service inbound calls. As a customer service customer service representative, I can put in notes, I can read certain fields, and I can put in disputes. I can't approve the disputes, but my supervisor can approve the disputes. They can also put in notes and they can also read fields. So, I mean, certain roles should be able to do different things in the system.
That was really important. Yeah. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Okay. Let's talk real quick about roles and permissions matrix whenever you're doing software development. every environment is potentially going to have different assignments of roles. Say, for instance, developers can do everything in have all of the abilities in development, but whenever you get to QA, the QA person also has the ability to do everything. They're like the super user. They have to be able to test everything. Then they can also test it in stage as a user, not as a super user. But in production, they're only a user. They can't get to everything. They can only get to what the typical user can get to. So you've got to look at all your different environments and what each role needs to be able to do in that environment as well. Okay. Do we have any questions, or has anyone used a roles and permissions matrix? Okay. We have just a few more minutes. Let me say one more thing about the roles and permissions matrix. What Bob has created here on the screen is awesome. I've found it helpful to create a second spreadsheet that has a list of all the users and then identifies which role they have. So that say you get moved from one department to another, your role needs to change in the system. And very often you have to have it listed somewhere. In the very best applications, it's easy to see who has what role. You know, it's just the administrator can go in and move roles around. And you may potentially have more than one role depending upon the permissions. But if you don't have that ability in your application, keeping it on a spreadsheet that multiple people can access but not change, it's locked down, is a really good way to say who has which role. That way, say I'm a supervisor and I get 3 new people added to my group. I get those 3 new people the same permissions that everyone else in my team has. And it's easy to see what everyone else in my team has. So you might need to consider having that as a secondary to your roles and permissions matrix.
Well, the article does say in text that every user is assigned a role, at least one role. So
Right.
it doesn't define what individual users you can do. You define roles and assign them to users.
Right.
So a role is just a package of permissions across the available activities. That's all it is. And you can think of an X or not an X is, if there's an X there, it's true, I can do that activity as that role. And if there's no X, I cannot do that activity as that role.
You can also use V for view only and E for edit.
Well, there are separate things there. Create, modify, delete, assign,
you're right.
So there are a lot of ways to do this. You can have permissions that are more than just true or false, go, no go. So it depends on how you define the activities. For example, approving spending items, managers of different levels may have dollar amounts they are allowed to approve. So you may put in dollar amounts, and of 0 would be okay. I can't approve any spending. A line manager might be able to approve up to $1,000, a senior manager $20,000, and the CEO whatever. So
right. This is a great way to identify some business rules in a graphical format. So if you're looking at this, you're kind of going, oh, this person can do this thing. But that's a business rule. That's what we live on, right? Okay, we are at the end of our time. We will work on 2 other techniques next week. If you're interested in reviewing any of these techniques, all we need you to do is let me know through LinkedIn which technique that we haven't yet covered you're interested in reviewing, and when you were interested in doing it. We'd like to get all the techniques done before we stop for Thanksgiving. And that will be our second round through the BABOK entirely, thoroughly with our team. So if you're interested, reach out to me on LinkedIn and we will see you here next week. Bob has put in chat the list of techniques. Go down to the bottom and you'll see, is it series 1, series 2? What's the word, Bob?
Cycle.
Cycle
We're
1
on
and cycle 2.
cycle 2.
We're on cycle 2.
Right,
We've already gone through it once.
We have 8 techniques left to cover this cycle.
So, that's all we have left. We want to get it finished.
Are we going to do any more questions before Thanksgiving?
I don't know that we're going to have time to, because we have to cover 8 more techniques and we only have 4 more weeks, and doing 2 per week that takes care of it, and we won't be able to cover any more questions. However, if we get all the techniques done and we have a week free, we will do questions, and we can do either random questions throughout the BABOK. We can do specific for a specific chapter or a section.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Okay, folks, once again, if you have any questions, reach out to me on LinkedIn. If any of you are looking for jobs like I am, reach out to me on LinkedIn, because I'll be glad to send recruiters to you and that have jobs that fit your needs. But I need to know what your needs are. You know, do you want remote only? Do you want a certain industry? Whatever. But let's help each other, okay? All right. Thank you all. See you next week. Bye.
See you next week.